Before we move on to part 2, let's do a quick recap of the 4 main ideas we covered in part 1 of this series. First, spiritual freedom is not dependent on environmental conditions. You can live in a free country and still feel imprisoned. Second, Jesus promised that there is a truth that will make us free. If we consider Jesus an authority on spiritual matters, this is an important idea we'll want to consider. Third, to be enslaved to sin simply means we're not present. We're focused on the negative possibilities of what if, rather than on the freeing reality of what is. And finally, trying to escape to this now moment is still a form of bondage. The self-image cannot live in the now because it's tethered to time and space, the past and the future, and the attainment of presently unfulfilled desires. Most of us probably think of the soul as an element within the body. When we think of the soul, we may imagine that it's centered somewhere in our body's midsection. We associate the soul with feeling, and feeling is at a gut level. Our self-image is a body-based identity that probably includes a concept of the soul. To begin our experience of spiritual freedom, we need to start thinking from the exact opposite perspective. Rather than think of our soul as living within our body, we begin to think of the body as living within the soul. Your soul can live without your body, but your body cannot live without your soul. As you think about this, it'll help put things in perspective. Your soul does not need a body. Your body needs your soul. That's a very important perspective to have, because when we're talking about spiritual freedom, and we're talking about sin as the act of not being present, missing from the present, it's because we're operating from the body-based identity, the self-image. And the self-image, as we've seen, is tied to time and space. When I was seeking freedom from my apprehension about starting the 5th grade, I was thinking in terms of time and space. I'm here now, but the time will come when I'll have to face a thing I'm not looking forward to. So I have to do something to protect or buffer myself from this thing I'm not looking forward to. We've seen that the soul is always in the here and now. The soul can't leave the present moment. The self-image, on the other hand, can never enter the present moment for any significant length of time. Though this runs contrary to what most of us have probably learned from our New Thought, New Age teachings, we find that when we try to live in the now moment, we're trying to force the self-image to behave like the soul. The soul dwells in eternity. The self-image is totally grounded in concepts of time and space. The self-image can imitate the soul, but only for brief periods. I'm sure most of you have discovered that. I know I have. We try to reel in the self-image and keep it here in the now, but it keeps breaking loose. It's like trying to tell a cat what to do. As we open ourselves to the experience of our soul, we naturally come to the now moment. We don't have to force this issue. We don't have to force ourselves to think positive or feel good about our life. The soul's natural state is positive, naturally optimistic. We don't understand this because our thinking tends to be disconnected from the soul. We become that prodigal son, wandering in the far country. We don't experience the soul because we're looking for what the soul freely gives, somewhere in time and space. We can tell we're wandering in the far country, dominated by census-based input, because we always feel as if something is missing. You can go through your life accomplishing and accumulating many things, and you can carry a feeling of pride for what you've done. But there's still that nagging feeling that something's missing. And what that something is you. It's me. It's our true essence, our soul. Now, we've seen that the soul is not really missing. It's the one thing that can't go anywhere. But our attention can go everywhere, and it always does. Our attention isn't anchored in the soul. It's anchored in the self-image, in the apparatus of the self-image, the personality, the ego, all the projections and fears of the future, the regrets of the past, and all the issues we engage in our daily life. These are the very issues we're trying to resolve with our spiritual studies. We will not resolve these things at the level of the self-image. We can't. It's impossible. We have to stop sinning. I'm sure we've all heard that before, but it's true. Just maybe not in the way we learned it. In this context, we stop sinning the moment we acknowledge the truth and the presence of the soul. Our attention naturally shifts away from the what-if syndrome and moves into the what is. When I first began to attend Unity at Unity Village in Kansas City, I was struck by the profound feeling of having come home. As John Denver sang in Rocky Mountain High, coming home to a place he had never been before. It sounds like a contradiction in terms. Coming home to a place he'd never been before. That's how I felt. And over my nearly 40 years in ministry, I've heard people say this many times. Someone comes to this church for the first time, and yet they'll tell me they feel as if they've come home. I understand what they're saying. They're not saying that this building, this place, is the home they've been missing. They're saying that at the soul level, they resonate with the ideas that are shared here. It feels natural. It feels right. Shifting our awareness to the soul is the act of coming home. Jesus talked about the prodigal son going out into the far country and turning one day and coming home. This is our story. And when we come home, we realize there's nothing missing. All that we need is here. This is fulfilling. Being here now, this is fulfilling. When I started attending Unity Village in those early days, I still had problems. There were still unresolved issues in my life. Things I thought would make my life better. Were they resolved? And they were resolved over time. But there were always new issues that came up. And they continue to this day. There will always be new issues. There will always be unsatisfactory conditions that we want to resolve. But that feeling of coming home was a strangely familiar thing. The reason that it's strangely familiar is because we're trying to live in a place we don't own. We're attached to conditions. We're attached to the body. But we don't own any spiritual real estate in this far country of the self-image. When we have an experience that gives us that feeling of having come home, we've shifted our awareness from the circumference of our identity to the interior, our spiritual essence, our soul. The feeling of coming home is simply an alignment of our present awareness with the truth of our being. Jesus told his followers that the slave has no permanent standing in the household, but the Son belongs to it forever. If then the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. He's saying that when your awareness shifts from the self-image to the soul, you have that feeling, that experience of coming home. You are the rightful heir in the household of God. Regardless of how hard it tries to make itself worthy, the self-image, the ego, will never attain that status. This is the slave to sin, the slave to not being present. Now all this begins to make sense. Sin is not an offense against God. Sin is an offense against our freedom. The offense is committed simply by not being present, not being conscious of our soul. We're feeding the needs of our self-image, trying to keep it happy, feeling safe and worthy. The self-image is the slave to sin, and it can never be the owner of this household that is our life. But it never stops trying. But the Son, the soul, is the owner and is always living in this household. The closer we get to this awareness, the more we experience our true homecoming. When I went to Unity Village and I experienced that feeling of coming home, it was because I was able to disassociate with that sense of self that I thought I was. Going there was the start of a new chapter in my life. It was a new beginning, a time of significant change in the way I'd been thinking of myself in my life. Like a seed dropped into the ground, I was ready to die to my seed self and move into the experience that Unity had promised. It was a transitional period of opening the door to my true home. But my home isn't a place. It certainly wasn't Unity Village. The time came when I knew it was best to move on, to put that place behind me. It has served its purpose for me, and it will continue to serve its purpose for others. Jesus said that we're to call no man on earth our Father. In the same way, we call no place on earth our home. The place was the catalyst that prompted me to experience the truth of myself. In that period of self-discovery, I was able to lay aside my self-image for long enough to know there was a lot more to me than I'd ever imagined. And to know that there's a lot more to me that's here right now. No place gives you the feeling of having come home. The place stimulates the awareness, that connection to the deeper reality of your being. But you and I actually make the connection. And when that connection is made, we realize that no new circuits are put in place. We're simply flipping a switch that has been with us all along. When we flip that switch, we know we're home. Another example of how we can easily become sinners. I've been working with video for the church and for this presentation. Video files are very large. They require a lot of computer memory. I purchased a computer earlier to use for music and for video, and I thought it had enough memory to handle these files. But it didn't take long to discover that this simply wasn't true. Every time I'd make some change, that little circle would come on and spin and spin, and it would keep spinning. You just have to sit there and wait. I could go make a cup of coffee, maybe wash the car, mow the lawn, whatever. I needed more computer memory. So I ordered 6 memory chips from a company, one of those mysterious third-party sellers through Amazon. Because of the deadline I had with this presentation, I admit that I was a little anxious about ordering from a third-party seller. This kind of presentation requires a lot of editing. And if your computer runs slow, a lot of waiting. The day came when the company emailed me and told me the order had shipped. In 2 days, my memory would arrive and life would be good. Plenty of time. The package arrived on schedule. When I took it out of the mailbox, it looked kind of small. But memory chips aren't very big. They're pretty thin. They're a plastic wafer. It just didn't look like this package could hold 6 chips. So I took it in the house and started opening it. It was wrapped in 3 layers of packaging, each one totally adult-proof. You know what I'm talking about. It's one of those products that is guaranteed for life because they know you can't open it. You have to borrow your neighbor's jackhammer to get into it. So that's what I did. As I hammered away at these layers, the package just kept getting smaller and smaller. Finally, I got down to the actual item, and instead of 6 chips, there was only 1. Suddenly, I started projecting. How am I going to complete this program with insufficient memory in my computer? I'll be waiting forever. By the time this thing stops spinning, July will have come and gone. I'll never make the deadline. Well, I caught myself because I was preparing this talk. I said to myself, this is exactly what it means to sin. You're projecting to the future. You're thinking, what if you don't have the computing power to finish this program? It's going to take a very long time, and your life is just going to be totally miserable. It'd be better if an asteroid hit the Earth with you standing right under it. Of course, that didn't happen. In fact, the very next day, the problem was beginning to be resolved. I wrote to the company and I explained they'd only sent one chip and there should have been 6. They said yes. The other 5 are on their way. So I went down that projection road for a few yards before I caught myself. In fact, I was able to change my experience before the problem was actually resolved. I loosened up. I stopped worrying about it. This was not a problem that only an asteroid could solve. I started thinking, if I have to wait, if I have to watch that spinning circle, it's not going to be the end of the world. And why should I let a slow-running computer ruin my life, rob me of my freedom? Well, if you work with computers for any length of time, you're going to see that spinning circle. And you're going to be tempted to start believing that when it finally stops, your life is going to be a whole lot better. When you get into the habit of thinking like this, you become a slave to sin. When that thing stops spinning, my life is going to be better. I'll be free. When my memory chips arrive, I'll be free. I'll be fulfilled and happy. I'll never have to worry about another thing. This will be it. The question is, do I want to be free when the memory chips finally arrive? Or do I want to be free now? This is always the question. Memory chips or whatever. Am I going to be a slave in the household, or am I going to be the son who is already free? Which way do I want to go? Of course, I want the freedom. And am I foolish enough to think that someday every order I place is going to be fulfilled exactly as it should be, arrive on time, and when it gets there, my life is going to be just perfect? We all like it when things work like they're supposed to, but we know that doesn't always happen. It's always been exciting for me to order things online. As a kid, mail ordering was a great thrill. I'd order some toy from the back of a cereal box and then live with this feeling of great anticipation. I'd count the days, but I had no idea when it was coming. They didn't have tracking numbers back in those ancient times. You just had to wait. The whole time, I'd be building great expectations. When that plastic thing finally arrived, my life was going to be perfect. Well, this time I was waiting for 6 plastic things to arrive. And I found I was still tying my hope for a better life, my freedom, to the arrival of those things. But that's not where my freedom is. That's not where true freedom is. That issue is resolved. The memory arrived, and I haven't seen that spinning circle quite as much for some time. And this is a good thing. I truly want this convenience. But I also understand that I'd rather have the freedom I experienced when I let go of that problem, when I stopped sinning, when I let go of the condition I was placing on my happiness, my freedom. To stop sinning is to pull our attention from this kind of thinking. Issues always get resolved. Sometimes they call for action on our part, and sometimes it's a kind of action that we're not real comfortable with. But even if this is the case, we can do it from our place of power, our soul, the rightful heir to our household of this earthly experience. Or we can continue to do it from the level of the slave, who will never own anything, who will never experience that sense of having come home. The slave will never have that feeling of coming home until it is set free to return to its home, wherever that is. In one sense, this is what we do. We set our self-image free to go. I let you go. I don't need you anymore. We've explored a number of ideas over this past 2 weeks that I hope have served as a catalyst to a positive change in your own self-perception. Let's summarize the main points we've explored here. Am I making my freedom conditional? Am I waiting for something to happen before I experience the freedom I desire? If so, I'm approaching my life from the level of my self-image. The truth that sets me free is the understanding that I am a spiritual being. My soul is complete and free right now. My freedom does not come through accomplishment. My freedom comes through revelation. I do not abandon my desires or my dreams, but I seek to experience now the freedom I believe I will have once I achieve these things. My soul will not become greater or freer than it is right now. Accepting this truth, I move out of this consciousness of sin, this habit of not being here, of being absent, and I experience the freedom that is truly my rightful inheritance. It's important for us to know when we're succumbing to the demands of the self-image, the more peace we experience, the closer we are to the soul. When we're responding to the self-image, the resolution we seek is always associated with time and space. Our answer is somewhere in the future, in a place we have not yet reached. The soul is at perfect peace, regardless of conditions. By surrendering control, we actually find our point of strength, our center of power. When we become okay with whatever happens, we've entered the domain of the soul. The self-image always works toward forcing a specific outcome. The soul knows that the highest good for ourselves and for all concerned is always unfolding. This is the truth that sets us free. Thank you for watching. Beth and I want you to know how much we appreciate your love and support. Our prayer for each one of you is that you know this truth we've explored in these 2 lessons, and this truth makes you free.